and I'm going to log in. So just to recap, last week we deployed a site and we took the first couple of steps by creating a user class and an admin user. So this week we're going to step into the next step, which is configuring the corporation record. Now, that's a very long task, depending on what the customer wants and needs. So I'm going to start with Corp Info 1. So I'm going to go to Master Files, and I'm going to go to Corporation. And we created this last week, so I'm just going to click on Modify. This gets me into all of these settings and these configurations. Now, for the record, I deter people from coming in here and playing around, because there are so many different things that can happen when you change your configurations that I tell people, just let me know what you need and I'll do the configurations. It took me years to learn them and what the effects of them are. So I would never expect a new customer to understand that or to have that level of knowledge or expertise. So what we're going to do today is I'm just going to go through each of the fields. If you notice, there's several tabs across the top, and I'm going to go through each of the fields over here and just have a general discussion about them. Starting on the upper left where it says the default, I call this a dialog box, right? Because it's kind of separated from everything else. So up here under language, this is deceiving. And I've had this conversation with people so many times. I don't know why it's here. Maybe it was here in anticipation of future developments, but those future developments have not happened right as of today. And EPMX is only available in English. That's it. So even though it's here, when you hit the drop down, it only says English, and that's the only option. There are some other areas where we can do make some little tweaks where a vendor's currency can show up as their currency. You know, if they're in the UK, or, you know, if they've got Iraqi dinars or whatever it is they have, we could do some tweaks on the PO, but as far as EPMX, it's going to display in its entirety in English. Perhaps what I would recommend to someone, if they said, well, I need it in French, I would say, well, why don't you, I will put it back on them, because it's not really our responsibility, right? Put it back on them to go do some research and see if perhaps a Google Translator would work for them. Okay? Right. I would not personally do that research for anybody. I'll research the software and what we can do to help them. But I don't know. Maybe there's a Google Translator that might work for them. I don't know. I don't use it. So my answer is it's available in English, period, end of discussion, right? The ship-to code is the address. So in EPMX, the ship-to code is a couple of things. It's actually two things. So it is on the PO and the requisition documents, it tells the vendor where to ship the items. And then once the items arrive, that ship-to code becomes your warehouse if you have the inventory module. You can have multiple ship-tos. So if you have 10 different physical locations where items will be shipped, you can create 10 ship-to addresses. Just pull the right one into your documents, and then EPMX will update your inventory if you have inventory. Okay, now the reason it's on this tab is because you can set a default. So let's say in this, this scenario, and you'll hear this when you're talking to customers if you haven't already. Well, we have 10 departments and we want everything separated. Okay, so we set up 10 corporations and each one has its own ship-to. We can pull in a default ship-to right here, and that information will always be pulled into the documents for the users, and they won't be able to change it so that they can't make a mistake. So sometimes this comes up with people. So that's what this is here for. Once you create the ship-to codes, we pull it into the corporation configurations if the customer doesn't want them to be able to change the ship-to address and they have a multi-corp setup. So even in that just little bit, there's an if and an and statement there. So you can see how something that simple expands into something even more. Well, they could use this if they do this and if they do that. But if they do this and not that, then they can't use it. So that's what happens a lot in the corporation configurations. So I rarely use this feature right here. A build to code. I often use this one because let's say in that same scenario, you have multiple locations and you're setting up a multi-corp situation. Almost always, there is only one build to address. All of the invoices go to the corporate headquarters, and that's where they pay the bills, right? In most businesses. So a lot of times, I'll just pull the build to code in here, and then it automatically fills for them every time they create a document. So that's, again, what this is for. This will be the default settings. Now, do you guys know what special text codes are?
Nope.
No.
So sometimes customers have a set of terms or codes that they want identified with every PO document. I can't think of any examples offhand because I think I've only used this once, but special text codes would be, let's say, for example, now we have job codes and we have projects. So we always use those first. But let's say they need to identify that PO as being a PO for a specific research job, and they want it to show up on the PO. They can create special text codes. So let's use the lab example, a research facility, and they have different grants, and they want to identify the grant that PO is related to. If they're using job code and project for something else, then they could go in and create a set of grants using the special text codes, and they could pull them into the purchase order document. That is available as a corporation default as well, but I have never used it. I'm into my 5th year now, and I have never used it. But keep it in mind when you're talking to people.
Right.
Okay.
And Tammy, I think just setting a job code most often than not does the job. I mean, maybe that's the reason they don't really. I mean, if it's a research project and they want to tie that PO to that particular project,
so
I think the job code would do the job.
Yeah, it does do the job. Job codes and projects work most of the time. But when you start talking to somebody who says, well, we have this requirement and this requirement and this requirement, and what about this and what about that, and how are we going to get this into there, and you're running out of fields, you can always say, you know what, let me look into the special text code field and see if we can make that work for you. I would never tell them we can until you know the software really, really well. I would always say, let me look into it. And then you can do your testing and see if it works, or you could ask me questions, or if any questions, is there and it's available.
Right.
Now, when it comes to the buyer field, we don't usually use this, but here's where you would use it. I leave this one blank 98% of the time. If someone says to me, I'm the only buyer and there's no need for anything to go to anybody else. Whenever it's approved, it needs to come to me. Okay, well then we would pull their name in here. But if they have more than one buyer, or if there's other people, like let's say oftentimes there's 3 buyers, then we're going to have to do it differently. And we'll get to that later on in the corporation record. But for now, suffice it to say that this is if there's only one buyer for that corporation. If you have a multi-corp setup and you have one buyer for each corporation, you could set it that way as well. Okay, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So you have the ability to pull in an expediter. Expediting is for like a delivery of items. So let's say an item is received, then an expediter gets notified and they deliver that up to the 12th floor, that item. Or in inventory, you have an expediter who delivers the items that are requested. That's really what an expediter is. Again, I've never used this, but just keep in mind so that when you're talking to people, we have a few different ways where we can establish those types of criteria for customers. Again, terms code. Terms code, we create a set of terms codes, and if you have one company that only has one terms code, which rarely happens, then you can pull it into the corporation. Most of the times, the terms codes are tied to the vendor. And we can tie specific terms code to the vendor, and that is the preferred way. Purchasing GL account code. If you have a customer who says, we have 5 departments, we want a multi-corp setup, we need everything separate, and each site has its own GL account code. Now that's singular, not plural. They have one GL account code for each site, then you can pull it into here. Okay, if there's multiples for each site, then we would do it differently. So this is restricted to 1. This will give them access to only one GL account code, and everything they do will be charged to that GL account code for this corporation.
Okay.
Okay.
Quick question, Tammy. I get to hear from prospects, like we just ran through all these codes. A few of them would be like, yeah, we want this to be permission-based access for few users, and we want few of them to have access to all of it. So, maybe one user should have access to all the shipping codes across all those different corporations. So is that possible? We can set them up in that way, right?
So in the employee file, right here, you have assigned GL account codes. It can assign it to individual users.
Okay.
So what we would do is we would import all of them, and then we would only assign each one to that user.
Right. So first we're going to import all the GL account codes, and then we're going to assign them.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. So let's go back to corporation. Okay. Now, I'm not sure if you guys are aware of this, but it's unusual. But sometimes companies, even though there's 12 months in a year and there's 12 months in a fiscal year, every once in a while you'll find somebody who does it based on 13 periods. So you can set EPMX up as far as your corporation and how it's configured based on your accounting periods. So that's what the periods in a year is. I've only come across one person who had 13 periods. It didn't affect them very much because they didn't have inventory. But then what you're going to enter is current accounting period. We're setting it up now. What is your current accounting period? So if you're in your 3rd quarter, then we're going to enter your current accounting period is, let's say, September 2020. Okay. Now this date entered is today. It's going to default to today's date. And notice I can't click on this. It won't change. That's an automatic default. That whenever I create the corporation, that's what this date is. Okay. Now, all of these down here below, assign PO number, assign RFQ number, assign vendor code, item code, and asset number. If you put a check mark in here, EPMX will auto-generate the numbers for you as you're working throughout the software. If you don't, then you will have to manually assign them. So there's 2 ways that you can do it. However, if you have it set to auto-assign a PO number and you want to override that with your own PO number for whatever reason, the answer is yes, you can do that. And this question does come up a lot. And it's the same for RFQs and vendor codes. It's the same for all of these. But generally speaking, best practices is that you keep it consistent. So I start everybody out at 1,000 as the last PO number assigned. And the reason I do that, I'm going to say 1,000 for all of these. There's a very specific reason I do that. Do you guys use Excel? You know when you pull a report and you have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you export it into Excel, And Excel will pull the report, and instead of everything being in number order, it'll say 1, 11, 111, 11, 11, instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Have you ever seen that in Excel?
Not really.
It's okay if you haven't, but and you probably won't need to get into this detail with them. This is what I do, but just so you know, this is what I do. Almost everybody gets auto numbered, gets all of these numbers auto generated, and I start them at 1,000 so that their reports are in order, in a sequence,
Okay.
so that they don't have to resort everything. It's very annoying. Trust me. Now, what you're seeing over here with these two check marks are the default. So when I deploy the site, EPMX automatically assigns a PO change number. So if you create a PO and you need to go back in and modify it for any reason, your PO in EPMX will display as PO number 1000-1. If you go in and you make a second change, it'll say PO 1000-2. And every time you make a change, that's what'll happen. So this is a default, and I always leave that on. And that's because we do not have the ability in EPMX to store and track the original data. So I can't run a report that will tell me this PO was originally for 5,000, and that change modified it to 2,000. And that next change brought it up to 7,000. That sequence of numbers is not stored. The only numbers that are stored are what's in there now. Okay?
So it's not real time, Tammy? I mean, it won't just...
No, it'll update it real time for you immediately, but it won't store the old data for you.
Okay.
Okay? And that's actually the problem that I'm having with jam sellers right now. They want to know what the original was, they want to know what the modifications were, and they want to run a report that has that data. Well, we don't have that because we can only tell you what you changed it to. What does it say right now? If you change it,
Okay.
Go ahead.
Can we, I mean, like what we changed it to and how many number of times we changed it, right? I mean, that number against the PO number would help me understand that if it's okay.
Yes. So if you look at something, if you look at a PO document, you pull it up and you look at it on the PO screen. Here, let me show you.
Mm-hmm.
You will see PO change number right here. It'll say 1, 2,
Right.
3. So you will know that it's been changed. You just won't know what it was before. You'll only know what it is now, which is kind of frustrating.
Right.
But
Yeah, you can't really store versions of those POs.
right. Yep. Okay, so let me go back here. Okay, now the next default is taxable default. By default, most of the time everything is taxable. But if you have a nonprofit, then we would just remove this and nothing would be charged as taxable in the PO documents. So that's not really a big deal. That's actually very simple. If most of your things are taxable, then we can identify what's taxable and not taxable in the material file when we upload. There's a tag for every single item, and we can say, yes, this is taxable, or no, this is not taxable. So there's several ways to do the taxable, the tax in EPMX. None of them are great, but there's lots of different ways that work for a lot of people. Now, some of these other items, like allow PO date change, this happens rarely. Why would you allow a PO date change when you can always get a PO change number, right? Wouldn't you rather see that it's been changed by getting a PO change number than allowing the date to be changed? And it will update the date each time it's changed. It will let you know in EPMX somewhere. I can't remember where, but it does let you know. So same thing. We often don't want to change the PO date, but if anyone ever asks you during a call, can we change the PO date? Yes. So all you have to tell them is yes. It's configurable. If you want to be able to change it, you can. If you don't, then you can't. Then we can set it so that you don't. It can't be changed. And the same thing with RFQ date changes. Short answer to the question is, can we change the RFQ date? Yes. If that's what you want, we can configure it that way. That's the best way to answer that question. Buyer default is user. So you guys may or may not have come across some of these types of questions, but a lot of times when prospects are thinking about what they want, they'll say, well, we have the assistants who are going to create requests for the lab. Okay, so let's say the lab has 5 employees and an assistant. The assistant's going to be creating documents for all 5 of those folks. When she logs in, what do we want to happen? Now, let me go to requisitions and I'll show you. So when I come in and I create a requisition, notice right here, I don't have a check mark in that box. So I'm able to select a user from here. So if I'm the administrative assistant and I'm creating this request for Mark Smith, then I'm going to scroll through here and I'm going to pick Mark's name. And we can tie that to Mark's approvers. But she's just creating the document to him, kind of like a secretary, right? She's doing the work for somebody else, but it has to follow the approval hierarchy of that other person. We can do that. Now, when we do, well, let me go back to corporation. When we click on this buyer default is user, I'm going to save this, and then I'm going to go back to a requisition, and you're going to see that, come here, there we go. You're going to see that, oh, it didn't take effect yet. Hang on 1 second. I'm in my test site today, not the live site, so hang on. Oh, it's there. Okay. And let me log out and log back in. Okay, well, maybe it's because there's only one user. I haven't set up any other users yet. But what's supposed to happen, hopefully it does, is my name will autofill here. And when I hit this, it won't do anything. This drop down will not expand for me to select another name. Okay, so that means you can restrict access. If I'm creating a document, it's only for myself. You can't create it for anyone else. And
right.
And that's actually important to people. It's important for control purposes because they don't want people going on and creating requests under other people's names a lot of times.
Unless on their behalf, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so master files, corporation, modify. Okay, so most of the time I've got a check mark in buyer default as user. So I'm going to leave that there now for now. Now with RFQs, do you want them to be able to allow changes in closed RFQs? I have a feeling this was created specifically for one company because they had a need, because no one ever wants RFQs adjusted after it's been closed. It's been issued to somebody already. But that's what this allows. If they ever ask you, well, what if we need to change an RFQ after it's closed? The first thing I would ask them is, well, why would you need to do that? Because and the reason I'm doing that, the reason I always put it back on the customer is because oftentimes they don't know what they want. And there's personalities that will come up with every possible scenario that could be a potential barrier or roadblock to signing on the deal, right?
Right.
Yeah. Very true.
They look for reasons to say this isn't good. So turn it back on them. And when they ask you something like that, that seems silly. Why? Well, help me understand. Why would you want to do that? Isn't that a control issue? Right? All of these things will make them think, because you'll find a lot of times that they'll say, well, yeah, I guess you're right. That's probably not a good idea. Right?
Right.
Yeah, that just loses the purpose. Yeah.
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 Okay, so that's really what the PO date, the RFQ. Why would you want to close a bid? But you can if they come up with a good reason. Right? If you ask them that question and they have a good answer, that's their business model for some reason. Then the answer is okay. That sounds reasonable. We can probably configure that way for you. Allow multiple vendors in POs from RFQs. So let's say you have an RFQ and it has 10 items in it. And you put it out to 3 people for bid. You want to use a combination of those vendors' bids to purchase the supplies, because maybe ABC Corp came in better on one, but EFG Corp came in better on some other items. If you want to be able to do that, you can. The answer is yes. You can allow multiple vendors, and you can create multiple POs from RFQs. Now, this one here will probably never come up, but I'll just give you an idea of what it is. Include void lines in all related reports. You can void documents in EPMX. Do you want them to show up in your reports? Well, some people might be like, yes, I want to see what's being voided. Okay, great. Your reports are going to be 400 pages long because it's going to have literally everything in EPMX. So this is something we use very carefully. But if someone has a good reason for wanting to see them, yes, we can configure it. Now, I don't even know why we created this one. Allow void of line with receipt activity. Okay, so here's a scenario. We created a purchase order and we ordered 12 items. We ordered 12 cases of pencils. We had one receipt of 6, and those other 6 are never coming. Do you want to void out that entire line? That's what this is. Can you? Yes. But there's repercussions to that. So again, it's you would have to investigate it and test it before you could say yes for sure. But if that question ever comes up during your calls, just think back to, well, I heard somewhere that you could possibly void lines. I want to go into all the details because it's too much, because there's so many. If it's an inventory item and you're voiding that line and you've received it, now you've got it in inventory. But what if if it was returned? What if it was a mistake? This isn't something that you would use lightly or regularly. But if anyone ever asks, well, could we void a line that's already been received? If that's what you want it to do, then we can configure it that way. All right. And I'm just giving you these terms and suggestions because this is what I found has worked for me when it comes to working with the customers. They do try to run the show, and a lot of times they have attitudes for no reason. They think we're their enemy. So the best way to answer their questions is, if that's the way you want it configured, then we can do it that way. Because you'll also find, which you may have found already, there's internal arguments and discussions too. If somebody wants it that way, but somebody else doesn't, then that's a side discussion for them. We're only responsible for letting you know what you can and can't do. And that, if that's what you want, you all can discuss it amongst yourselves and decide if that's what you want. And that removes you from participating in their contention, right? Let me see what else.
So Tammy, I had a quick question. This was actually about the allow multiple vendors in PO from RFQs. So in case we are actually creating a purchase order when, after reviewing the quotes, we decide that, say, a section of, the line items would, like, we would probably place that order from, say, Dell, and the other section would be, say, we are placing the order from HP. So when we send out these purchase orders to the respective vendors, do they get only a section of the purchase order which they have, which they have qualified for per se, or do they get the entire purchase order?
No.
Wherein they are okay.
Yeah, you're going to select a line. So
Mhm.
you're going to go to purchasing POs from quotations, and then you're going
Right.
to pull up the quotation, and you're going to click on the line and then convert it to a purchase order. So whatever you click on is what they're going to see.
Right.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So Aiden, you can do that. So when you flip that RFQ into a PO,
Mhm.
you might not want to take all the items. You might just want to take 2 of those items because you get a better price as compared to the
Right.
other vendor. So you
Uh-huh.
can send that. So they only receive only those 2 items, and the remaining would go probably to the other vendor.
Okay. Okay. So will the PO number be different for both of them?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Perfect.
Okay. So let's see. Okay, now these I usually do depending on what modules they have. Right here, I'm going to put a check mark in open requisition when purchase order is voided, or open quotation when purchase order is voided. The reason I put check marks in here is because let's say Karam put in a request and it was approved by Kevin, and then it came to me and I placed the order because I'm the buyer. And let's say I placed the order and then the vendor came back to me and said, hey, we're on back order for this item. Do you want to wait or do you want to reorder it? But Karan said in his notes that he needed it right away. So this gives me the ability to void or delete that purchase order and recreate a new purchase order with a new vendor so that we can get those items right away. Okay.
Oh.
Without a check mark in here, your PO's created, and now you can't do anything with the requisition. You'd have to go ahead and create a whole new purchase order. That doesn't make any sense. So I always put check marks in here. And it's the same thing with quotations. Talk about RFQs, if I click on one of those line items, say a case of pencils, and out of the 10 items on that RFQ, I decide to give this one to Amazon, and then Amazon comes back and says, hey, we don't have any of these, or they're on back order, then I can cancel or void that PO, and I can grab that and create another PO, grab that from the quotation and create another PO with Staples or Office Depot or whoever I want to go with. Okay.
Right. Right. And you would just do that. You would go to purchasing. You would create a PO from the same old requisition or the quotation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Awesome.
Yep. So send alert when vendor enters bid. By now, I'm sure you both know that when end users purchase a quotations module, they have the ability to generate login credentials for the vendors. These vendors will only have access to what you sent them. They don't have access to any other information in that RFQ. If you sent it to 5 other vendors, they won't know. When they log in, they will only see what you have asked them for a price for. They will enter their pricing. They can enter some notes and they can attach some specs if they want to, and they can save it. And then an alert will be sent to you, but you have to have a check mark in here. Specifically for you guys, yes, it can work that way if they want their vendors to log in. But what I hear from a lot of people is my vendors will never do that. And okay, fine, your vendors won't do it. But if you have a key set of vendors that you put bids out to on a regular basis, that might be a good option for you. You can also enter the bids yourself if you decide you want to send an RFQ out and it gets emailed to them, and then instead of going into EPMX, they email the quote back to you, you can go into the quotations module and enter the bid for them so that you have everything in EPMX. So there's a couple different ways to do it, but this will enable you to get an alert when the creator of the quotation is who will get the alert. So, Karan, if you created a quotation and then it was approved by your boss, or let's say, I'm the buyer. So let's say I created a quotation and the vendor logged in and Staples logged in and entered their bid, that notification would come to me. That's what this is here.
Okay, so the person who actually creates the RFQ,
yes.
or the person who creates the PO. Okay.
Yeah. So now we can upload a logo. So I thought I'd have this handy little fancy logo that I would bring in, and that's all you do. It's really that simple. Once I save and I log out and I log back in, this will print on all of my PO documents in the upper left-hand corner, my logo. And it used to display up here, but I noticed it's not doing that anymore. So I wouldn't promise that. Just know that this will print on the PO documents. Additional settings. We'll come back to this, and we'll come back to this. The DUNS number is only used for punch-outs. It's the only reason why we need a DUNS number. The fiscal year is defined right here. So if it's calendar year, fiscal year, then we would just fill January 1 to December 31st. A lot of companies do like a July 1st start. So if that's the case, it would be July 1st to June 30th. And this does not define the year because the year is defined in EPMX. It's just the month. Okay. Now, these two little notes down here, copy blanket PO instructions to release. So you can create a blanket PO. Say, for example, you have legal fees. Okay, you have an attorney on retainer, and your annual fees are going to be $12,000. So you would create a $12,000 blanket PO, and each month you would create a release of $1,000 until you used up all 12 of those releases. At the end of the year, the balance of that blanket PO should be $0. Right here in the blanket PO, if you want the notes and the instructions to be copied from the master, the blanket, to each release, then you're going to put a check mark here. And this is the notes. So the instructions, if you remember the screen on the PO, the instructions are on the left,
Yeah.
and the notes are on the right.
Notes are on the right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's what this ties into, okay? I'm going to uncheck these because we rarely use these. I barely even notice that this is here, but this will give you the ability. Remember when we talked about earlier, you can assign multiple GL account codes. If you want to assign one to the corporation, you're going to do it here. If you want to assign multiples, you're going to do it here. First, we're going to import everything, and then we're going to assign them right here.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. Now, I want to go back to the default PO attachment. A lot of times, and especially in healthcare, they have like these terms that are like 5 pages, right? All these disclaimers and terms. If they want to create a terms document or some standard attachment that goes with every PO, it's a Word document. They can do that and they can attach it here. Actually, it looks like we can do any. I don't want to promise, but let's see if I can pull this one in. This is an Excel file. Yeah. So it looks like it's like everywhere else. You can do a PDF or a Word or an Excel file, and that will always go to the vendors when a PO is emailed to them. Additional document settings. And I'm just going to do an overview of this because this is really more configuration, but you will have people ask you these things. You'd be surprised about the detail that Kathy and I have to go into when we're talking to customers.
Yeah.
So take your time and go through this and look at it just to get an idea for what it is. And if you have any questions, let me know. But mostly we use the PO number prefix. So if we have some companies that want a prefix to print on their PO, they can do that. So for example, with Advanced Lifeline, I think that's who it was. They had 9 locations. So they put the state name in here. So for anything in Washington, it started with WA. So all PO numbers that printed were WA 1001. If it was Indiana, it would say IN 1001, all the way down to each site. Now, it doesn't display in EPMX. It only prints on the PO document. Okay? So some people find this useful and some people don't. But it's important to let them know that that's how that works. Otherwise, if they have to have a prefix, then they'll have to manually enter their PO numbers.
Okay.
Okay. Some people want the vendor code to show, the EPMX vendor code to show up on the PO. Most of the time they don't, but you have a choice. Here, right here is where we can set a, okay, do you see where it says display bill to literal? What do you want it to say? This is what I put here most times. Okay, by doing bill to with a colon, it will print the word bill to before it prints the company name and address on the PO. So I'm going to leave it there so that you can see it when we get to that point. But these are the ones that I use the most, the prefix and the display bill to. I leave everything else at the default. Line item details these are the items that we can say, yes, print on the PO document, or no, don't print on the PO document. So if anyone ever says, well, can I have the project show up on the PO document? You can say, yes, if that's what you want it to do, we can configure it that way. So then you would click on the drop-down arrow and you would say always display. And that's what each one of these gives you the option to always display, never display, or display if. All right, so we use these pretty regularly, not all the time, but pretty regularly. You can also have the approval details displayed, and you can display GL account code allocations. Now, these are line item detail settings. In the total and footer setting, this is the footer and the total of the PO document. You can click here and type display terms and conditions. And if it's not a document that gets attached, here's where you might say something like contacts accounting for all discrepancies. Whatever you want, whatever you want to put on here. You have a limited amount of, actually, that's the wrong place. This is the literal. So you would say terms and conditions. And
Right. Yeah.
Terms and conditions.
That was my question.
And you would type it in here. So you have a few line, like a paragraph to print.
Oh, okay.
All sales are final. No refunds, something along those lines. You could print it here. Otherwise, you can use the PO documents. If you want a signature to print on the PO, you're going to pull in the employee's signature name right here. It has to be an approver, a buyer, or anyone else that shows up in this queue, depending on other criteria. You can have up to 2 signatures. And these are the settings for the subtotals. How do you want it to look on your PO? I don't go into detail with this about anybody. Only the ones that I covered are the ones that I usually go into. So the terms and conditions are important, and whether or not these items show on the PO are important. So if you're on the phone, if you're on a call with someone and they ask you, well, can we have this display? This will give you a good idea of what you can have display. See, here's your special text codes, right? If you wanted it to be applied to a certain grant, you could say always display, go in and special text codes, and they would enter it when they create a PO document. Those are the types of things that are most widely used.
So Tammy, when prospects tell us, do you have custom PO templates? So I feel this is like the window where we can tell them that, yeah, I mean, this is the flexibility we allow, that you can display certain items. Like we just went through all the special text codes, job codes. So I think that's the flexibility we provide them on the PO front. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would be very cautious about, because I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
Customers often use words that we think mean one thing and they mean something else. So what I would say, what I have found works is our software is highly customizable. However, we are an out-of-the-box software. So we don't have custom templates. We have a template, but we can modify what can be displayed and what can't be displayed in several different areas. And then I would say, send me what you want to see and we'll research it. If I don't know something and it's complex, I don't pretend to know it. I don't consider myself, I don't need to be a know-it-all, right? Quote unquote. And I will say, send me what you need exactly, and I will research it for you. And that works for me every single time. So
yeah, that's a great way to put it, that we have one template and we can modify that. But at the end of the day, yeah.
So that's everything on Corp Info 1 tab. I mean, the Corp Info tab. Each week we'll go through each one of these. Some of them are smaller, so some of them are a little more complex. But for now, do you guys have any questions, or do you need me to make any tie-ins for you on anything we covered today?
So Tammy, I had one question here. When it comes to, say, assigning PO numbers, assigning RFQ numbers, is there a field for assigning rec numbers as well? I mean, can Bellwether do that?
Yes, we can. It's on a different tab. It's on the REQ.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Yep. So I know it seems to me like it should be here with everything else, but it's not, because the requisitions has its own tab. I guess that's where they decided to put it. But short answer, yeah.
Okay. Yep, perfect.
Okay. All right. So is there anything that you have any questions about that you're working with now that maybe I can help you with?
Tammy, I remember when you spoke of prospects having 8 different locations and they want to have the prefix in front of the PO. So I wanted to understand, let's say they have 8 locations. So the buyer of, let's say, location based out of Arizona, he's going to enter into that particular corporation and create a PO or whatever, maybe an RFQ. So I'm trying to understand, how does it make sense? Because anyways, it's a different corporation, it's a different entity, or maybe a different location. So how does a prefix, show the difference over there? Because ideally, it's. I mean, a person based out of, let's say, Kentucky cannot do that from Arizona because he doesn't have access. So it's understood that probably, this particular quote or this particular PO was raised from this particular location or this entity. So why would we have the prefix there? I mean, why do prospects generally ask for a prefix on the PO? Is it very rare?
No, they ask about it more often than not. But the reason, okay, so I understand your question and I agree with that thought process, but you have to remember that the customers are used to doing things a certain way, and they're going to speak in terms of the way they're used to doing it. And some people are incredibly resistant to change. No, this is how we do it. It has to be this way. It has to be figured out if this is going to work. Well, okay, we can do that for you, and here's how it works. But the truth is, when you have a multi-corp setup, you can restrict access. Okay, let's say you have a multi-corp setup. Let's say you have 5 locations, and you have one buyer for all 5 locations.
Right.
That buyer is going to view everything in terms of the location. So the one thing people say to me, well, it's going to be confusing. What if they have the same PO number? Okay. Well, let me show you a report that we run. Hang on one second. I'm gonna pull up another. Let me see who's got. I don't think anyone here has it. So let me pull in my office site. So this is just an old test site that Thomas set up for me. And there's a ton of different data in here. Let's say I'm going to purchasing standard PO. If I'm one buyer for all locations, I cannot create this document without selecting a corporation. I have to select a corporation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So and then the PO number forms it forms in ePMX without the prefix. And when I look at reports, when I go to run reports, when they say, "Oh, it's going to be confusing with same PO numbers," no, it's not, because you're going to go here and you're going to choose.
Put the corporation, yeah.
Yeah.
Or even if you select all, watch what happens. I'm exporting it to CSV, which everybody uses Excel.
Right, and filter it.
Yeah, they use Excel. Here's what it gives you. It gives you the corporation. All you have to do is apply a filter.
Right. Right.
And I've got this on the wrong screen. Sorry. All you have to do, here's your report. All you have to do is apply a filter at the top and look at what you want to look at. I only want to see Bellwether. So that just took off blinky lights. So when I show them this, they're like, "Oh, that's way better. That's way better." Yeah, we don't. So oftentimes the prefix won't matter, but you are going to have people who can't let go.
Right.
So, that's why I say, here's what I do. I would never get into what they should or shouldn't do. I would always just say, if I was you, right? Now, for me, that's my job. That's what I do. I need to get into the nitty gritty with them. But for you, I would say, we can do that. It's configurable based on whether or not you want it to do that. And that gives them what they need to know to make a decision. The behind the scenes stuff about how we're going to do it and why I think they should or they shouldn't, that's what I do with them. That's what the business assessment is.
Correct. Yeah.
And it removes you. You could go for months with these people into the weeds. All they really need to know is yes, until they say to you, "We'd like to see how it works." Then the answer really simply should be, "It's configurable. We can configure that," or "No, that's not the way it works, but it does do this." That's, that's how far you guys should probably get into it with them. So, all right. Anything else?
Nope. I think this was very informative, Tammy, again. Yeah, I know. You made a lot of sense that this is actually for us. We're running through demos with Kathy, and I think a common feedback is, even Kathy tells us, don't get into the details because it's going to be an endless loop. They'll always have questions. You're going to open more tabs. Let them question you. If they ask you, just show them that this is how we can do it in the system. But don't really have a set flow chart that I'm going to go through all these items and then move forward, because you're going to run out of daylight. It's never going to end.
Yeah, Aiden's going to get into the details more than you are because he's doing a lot with customer success. But you just need to have that basic understanding. And, and Aiden's separation when it comes to customers is going to be recognizing the keys on when to go into detail and when not to go into detail.
Right.
And he's talking based on, I know Vinny and I have talked about some of the calls you've had where, like right off the bat, it was made very clear. Don't sell me anything. I don't want to know the details. Give me a high level. These types of things. People have said to me, high level. I can do high level. I was trained to do high level. I'm a detail person,
Right.
but even at high level, I've got, people saying to me, high level, Tim, I don't need those details.
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah, this is probably the common like feedback which we've received from some of the customer calls that we've been in recently as well. It's like, they want to just know at a very high level how that thing happens. And it's it's almost ironic, because the moment we kind of step into details, when Vinny actually tries to show them how it happens on the software, more often than not the response is, well, if there's so much to do, let's kind of just stick to what we have already.
Right.
So I mean, yeah, so I understand it's about understanding when you need to really get into so much details, and more often than not that's actually not the case
Yep.
over the calls, actually. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, then I will let you guys go. I'll go ahead and render this video and I'll send it out to you again. And I'm storing everything on Dropbox. I don't know if you guys have
Perfect.
access to it, but you'll see where it is when I send you the link.
Perfect.
All right. So thank you
All
for
right.
your time, gentlemen. You have a lovely weekend. And as always, if there's anything I can do to help, please feel free to reach out.
Sure.
Thank you, Tammy.
Thank you so much. Thank you so
Thank you
much,
again.
Tammy.
Have a great weekend.
You too. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.